My name is Araven. I'm 32 years old. Until recently, I thought the worst thing my sister could do was show up at my house without asking and leave her kids with me like I was free babysitting. But right now I'm standing in that same doorway wearing socks on a freezing porch in Buffalo. My feet are cold, the wind cuts through the thin socks, and I'm trying to explain myself to a police officer. My sister is yelling over his shoulder and my parents are standing behind me, staring at me like I'm a stranger, like I'm someone they don't know at all. Ma'am, the officer says, calm but serious. We got a call that 2 young children were left here alone and might be in danger. I need you to tell me what happened tonight. Here's what happened. My sister did what she always does. She drove into my driveway without asking with her kids in the back seat, already unbuckling them before she even knocked on my door. She expected me to smile, take the kids, and cancel whatever I had planned because I had always done that before. But this time I didn't. When she tried to hand me the overnight bag, I stepped back. I told her I was tired from work, that I hadn't agreed to watch the kids, and that she had to figure something else out. She went from pretending to be nice to really angry in about 3 seconds. She said I didn't care about her kids, about family, about anything but myself. Then she peeled out of my driveway with the kids still crying in the back seat. An hour later, my parents were calling me saying I was being mean and putting the kids at risk. And then a police officer came to my door with a notebook and a very serious face. Before I tell you exactly what I said to him and how it made my whole family upset, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this story. And tell me in the comments if you've ever been the responsible one. Everyone expects you to fix things. People see the big fight, but they almost never see all the little moments that made it happen. Before everything went wrong, my life in Buffalo was simple. I worked at a health insurance call center, renting half of a small duplex on a noisy street. I tried my best to keep my head above water. I had my little routines, my favorite coffee mug, my favorite sweater, and a small couch I loved to curl up on after work. Then my older sister, Isolde Rhine, moved back to town. Her marriage had ended and she came home with 2 kids, an old car, and a speech about starting over, about fresh beginnings. Her daughter Eloane was 6. She was serious for her age, like she carried important thoughts all the time. Her son Kale was 4, loud, full of energy, and always holding a worn-out stuffed dinosaur. My mom Varel and my dad Thayer were so happy to see Isolde. They acted like she had survived something really bad, even though she had just made some poor choices. They saw the kids as a blessing and started talking about how lucky I was to live close. At first, I thought I liked being the fun aunt who brings snacks, plays a little, then goes home to my quiet life. When Isolde asked me to watch the kids so she could go to interviews or appointments, saying yes felt natural. I wanted to help. It didn't feel like a burden. But it stopped feeling natural very fast. An afternoon with the kids became 2 or 3 times a week. Short messages saying they're coming over started popping up on my phone, and I would hear her car outside before I could even reply. My duplex quietly stopped being my space and turned into Isolde's backup plan. Toys spread into every corner. My couch, the one I loved, became the place the kids napped or threw snacks. My favorite books were shoved to the top shelf where I couldn't reach them, and my floor often had a sticky trail of spilled juice or crumbs from snacks the kids had dropped. My parents acted like this arrangement made perfect sense. They reminded me I didn't have a husband or kids and said it was okay for me to help more. When I tried to tell them I was tired or that work was getting harder, they thought I was just complaining, not setting a limit. They pointed out that Isolde was a single mom and said she was doing her best. The unspoken message was clear. Her problems mattered more than my limits. The stress built slowly. I started to not want my days off because they were never really mine. I went to work tired, listening to strangers get mad about medical bills while my brain replayed spilled juice, tantrums, and little feet running down my hallway. I would come home thinking I might get a few quiet moments, but there were always toys on the floor, messages on my phone, and then Isolde at the door with the kids. Around that time, my company announced a training program for a new team lead role. It wasn't a promotion yet, but it was a clear path to a better job, a job where my life could feel like it was moving forward. I applied and marked the training date on my crooked kitchen calendar. I let myself imagine a life moving forward, a life where I could make my own choices, where I could plan my own days, even if it was just small things at first. The morning of the training, I woke up early. I ironed my best blouse, practiced confident answers in my head while my coffee brewed, and felt a little spark of hope. Locking my front door behind me, I felt a small, unfamiliar sense of control, like maybe my time finally belonged to me. I could go somewhere, learn something new, maybe even get a better life. But by mid-morning that feeling was gone. I could hear cartoons, the kids crying over the wrong toast, and peanut butter getting mashed into my couch while the training went on without me. My phone blinked with a voicemail from my manager asking if everything was okay, and I didn't have a simple answer. Standing in my kitchen watching Alohan and Kale play on the floor where my notes were scattered, I finally saw the pattern I had helped make. I was still paying rent and going to work, but my time and my future were being taken away. Winter in Buffalo is heavy, and it made everything feel worse, including the parts of life I told myself were temporary. In the weeks after I missed the training, my routine looked normal to others. I went to work, apologized to strangers about bills I didn't send, then went back to my half of the duplex. But inside I felt like I was just a backup. Whenever Isolde needed help, I was the automatic answer. I noticed how quickly I changed my plans for her. A small message asking for help was enough to make me tense and give up my evening. I would erase my own plans and start thinking of excuses to help. It was only one night. She had it harder. The kids didn't ask for this. But my life kept getting pushed aside. One Friday after back-to-back calls, I found myself staring at my phone. Even though there were no new messages, I was already bracing for them. That's when I realized I was not just tired of saying yes. I was tired of living like my time didn't belong to me. So I made one small promise. My next night off would be mine. No extra shifts, no errands, no last-minute babysitting. Just a couch, a bad movie, and quiet hours that were mine alone. I imagined sitting on my couch with my favorite blanket, the TV humming softly and the heater warming my toes. I wanted this night to be calm, my own, a night I could remember as mine. When that night finally came, it felt delicate. I logged out on time and ignored the overtime prompt. The walk through the cold back to the duplex was short, but for once I wasn't thinking about anyone else's needs. I let myself believe I might get an evening that started and ended on my own terms. I made a cup of tea, grabbed a small plate of cookies, and settled onto my couch. For the first time in a long time, I felt like this moment belonged to me. Then my phone lit up with Isolde's name. Her first message said she was going out. The next said she had no one else. Another leaned on how much she trusted me with Alohan and Kale. The words were familiar, but this time they landed differently. They weren't ordered, but my feelings about them were different. My reflex tried to drag me back into the same situation as always. I told myself that one more sacrifice wouldn't matter, that I could rest later. The guilt came quickly, whispering that if anything went wrong while I enjoyed my movie, it would be my fault. This time I didn't let that feeling win. I typed slowly and told her I would not be taking the kids that night. I was tired. She needed to find another option. I kept the message short and sent it before I could change my mind. The duplex went quiet. I put the phone in a kitchen drawer and turned on the TV, trying to learn what it felt like to sit in my own living room without waiting for someone else to claim it. For a little while, the only sounds were the heater and the TV. I thought about what it would feel like to have evenings like this more often, evenings that were just mine. Maybe half an hour passed before headlights swept across my front windows and stopped. A car door slammed. Footsteps climbed the porch, a rhythm I knew too well. My stomach tightened before any knock reached the door. I knew exactly what was coming. Years of habit pressed on me, telling me to take the bag, step aside, and absorb whatever came next. At that moment, I understood that my message had been ignored. I opened the door to find Isolde on the step with her coat half open and an overnight bag slipping from her hand. Through the car window, I could see the outline of two small heads in car seats, faces lit by a tablet's glow. Everything about her posture said she was there to drop the kids off, not to ask. But this time I kept one hand on the doorframe and repeated the same answer I had already sent. Out loud. I was not taking the kids. I didn't argue, explain, or try to make a deal. Something in her face shut down. For the first time, Isolde did not get her way and the kids were not automatically placed in my care. The air felt thick, cold, and heavy. I could see the anger, the disappointment, and the shock in her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of power, of control, of my life finally belonging to me, at least for one night. She turned away, got back into her car, and drove out of the driveway faster than she should have on a quiet street like ours. The tires made a small screech as she left, and then the sound of her car engine disappeared around the corner. After that, the house felt very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that makes you feel calm or safe, but the kind of quiet that feels heavy and strange. It was the kind of quiet you notice when you are waiting for something bad to happen, but you don't know what it will be. I tried to watch television and tell myself that everything was fine. I turned the volume up a little and stared at the moving pictures on the screen. Maybe the TV would make the night feel normal again. Maybe it would make the house feel like mine. But it didn't work. My shoulders stayed tight, my stomach knotted up, and I kept glancing toward the front door. I was waiting even though I didn't want to. Waiting for something I didn't want to happen but that I was sure might. Then there was a knock at the door. 1, 2, 3 sharp raps. It sounded different than any normal knock. It was serious. Heavy. Important. Like the knock was saying, something is happening now and you can't stop it. I slowly walked to the peephole and looked out. There was a police officer standing on the porch. He wore a dark uniform, shiny badge, and a kind but serious face. Behind him, my parents stood on the porch too. My stomach sank all the way down into my toes. I knew this was not a normal visit. I opened the door because you never, ever ignore a police officer at your home. He introduced himself as Officer Corin Vale and said that someone had called about 2 young children being left alone in my part of the duplex. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at him like he had said something in a language I didn't understand. 2 kids? Left alone? That's not true. Not even close. Then my mind started to remember things. Only one person knew my routine that well. Only one person had stormed off earlier that evening, angry because I wouldn't watch her kids. Only one person had enough knowledge to make a false report like this. Isolde. My sister. My stomach dropped even lower, but beneath the fear a colder, sharper thought came. This wasn't just a little anger anymore. This was her trying to make a story stick. She was trying to get me in trouble. I stepped aside and let Officer Vale walk through the house. The place looked normal like it always did. 1 blanket on the couch, 1 mug in the sink, no toys on the floor, no extra shoes by the door. Nothing to make anyone worry. The house was quiet, exactly the way it should be on a Friday night. Officer Vale opened doors and looked in every corner. He did what police officers are supposed to do, even though there was nothing to see. My parents stood near the hallway, watching like they were hoping something bad would appear if they stared long enough. I could see my mom's face trying not to see the truth. My dad stayed quiet, not saying anything at all. The only thing that really mattered at that moment was on my phone. I opened my door camera app and pulled up the video from earlier that evening. The video showed Isolde on my porch, alone. No kids climbing out of car seats, no backpacks, nothing, just her standing there with me at the doorway and then her leaving when I didn't give in. I watched the video with my heart racing and Officer Vale watched it too. He nodded once, made a note and said that the visit would go into his report anyway because he had to. My parents heard the same words I did, but they didn't want to accept the truth. My mom's face tried to change the story in her mind. She was probably telling herself that Isolde must have been confused or stressed. She didn't want to admit that her older daughter had lied to the police. When they left, the duplex felt different. Everything in the house was the same, walls, furniture, pictures, but the feeling of safety was gone. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the knock, the police search, and my dad's silence. It was a quiet place that didn't feel calm. It was a quiet that made room for a scary realization. Someone you share blood with is willing to risk your freedom just to be in control. By the next afternoon, Isolde had made a vague post online. She wrote something about how heartbreaking it is when a family doesn't care about children's safety. She didn't write any names, but it was enough that people could guess. A few cousins and old friends sent messages asking if everything was okay. Their messages were polite, but you could feel the doubt underneath. Reading them felt like watching my life get rewritten in a place I could not touch or fix. Work didn't stop to let me untangle any of it. 2 days after the police visit, my manager, Soren Cade, asked me to come into a small conference room. Inside, waiting with him, was Aisling Faye, the human resources representative. The room felt heavy and serious. You could feel the air pressing down like it was warning you this conversation would not be simple or easy. They told me the company had received an anonymous complaint. The complaint said that I watched children while I was supposed to be working, left them alone and raised my voice at them. It even described my house, mentioned 2 kids and painted me as distracted and unreliable. There was no signature, no name, but I knew immediately who it was. Isolde. Only she knew my schedule and habits that well. Only she had ever spoken about me as the responsible one, and now she had turned that against me. Soren and Aisling explained that they would review my work calls and schedule, document the complaint, and put any talk of promotion or advancement on hold until the review was finished. They were professional, calm, and polite, but walking back to my desk, all I could hear in my head was the quiet question mark now hanging over my job because my sister had decided to drag it into her drama. The headset I put on for work felt heavier than usual. Every apology I made to angry clients carried an extra weight. I kept wondering what might already be written in my file, hidden in a system I couldn't see. Later that day, my coworker Tara Lynn came to sit with me in the break room. She didn't ask me to tell the whole story. She just reminded me that I didn't have to carry all of this alone. She said I could save every message, every note, every piece of evidence, and bring it to someone whose whole job is to protect people from harassment and interference. That thought followed me everywhere. Home, work, sleep. For a weekend, it stayed in the back of my mind every time my phone lit up with a notification. Eventually, I decided to call Maylise Rowan, a local lawyer. I looked at many profiles online, scrolling through names and pictures. Her profile stood out. It was simple, steady, calm. Former clients had left short reviews, all saying she helped them in a calm and organized way. Calling her felt scary, like stepping into something I could never undo, but by then I knew that doing nothing was even worse. Sitting in her small office downtown, I felt more exposed than I ever had with the police. With Officer Vale, the questions had been about one night, one event. With Maylise, the questions stretched back over many years. I laid out everything on her desk. Screenshots, printouts, the police report, camera footage, messages where Isolde treated my time like it didn't matter, the vague post online, the email from Human Resources. Explaining it out loud made the pattern impossible to ignore. Each piece on its own looked like a small problem, but together they made a map of someone testing how far they could push me without anyone stopping them. Maylise listened carefully. She didn't interrupt, she didn't gasp, she didn't make me feel embarrassed. She only asked for dates and names when she needed clarification. By the time I finished, she had a rough plan. She told me that what Isolde was doing fit the definition of harassment and interference. She said I had done the right thing by saving everything. The next step would be to formally tell Isolde to stop. She talked about sending a cease and desist letter, documenting any future contact, and keeping my employer informed so Isolde's complaints could not grow unchecked. She even mentioned a restraining order. Hearing it from someone calm and professional made it feel less like overreaction and more like a real tool I could use to protect myself. The letter went out at the end of that week. For a few days there was an unfamiliar quiet. Isolde didn't text me. My parents didn't call. Social media stayed still. For a little while, I let myself believe the letter might be enough to stop her. But that calm didn't last. One day I opened my mailbox and found a folded sheet of paper tucked between junk mail. There was no name, but the handwriting was familiar, the same loops and swirls from years of birthday cards and sticky notes. The message was short and sharp, reminding me that I had chosen against my family and that there would be no one to protect me next time. I stood at the curb holding the paper, feeling a mix of fear and anger. My neighbor, Zephra Lorne, walked by carrying her grocery bags. She noticed my face and asked carefully if I was all right. I told her a little about what had happened with my sister and the kids. Her expression changed. She said she had seen Isolde drop the children off and drive away more than once. She had been worried about the late-night lights in my home and small shadows moving around inside. Hearing someone else describe what I had normalized made me feel both embarrassed and relieved at the same time. Zephra even offered, without me asking, to be a witness if anyone ever needed someone to speak up. That made me realize it wasn't just my word against Isolde's anymore. There were people outside my family who had noticed what was happening. But the next sign of trouble didn't come as a message. Came as a feeling, a gut feeling, the instant I walked up my front steps one evening after work. The door was shut, but the latch didn't catch the way it usually did. The air inside felt wrong, faintly disturbed, like someone had been moving things around while I wasn't there. A chair was slightly out of place. A drawer wasn't fully closed. A faint scuff marked the floor near the back entrance where no one else should have been. And then, in the middle of the kitchen table where the surface was usually clear, lay another piece of paper. The handwriting was the same as before. Short, clear. It said, "Family does not drag family into court." I felt my heart thump so hard I could hear it in my ears. Isolde had crossed another line. She had found a way to scare me even with the lawyer, the police, the letters, and the evidence. And now I realized something important. Protecting myself wasn't just about stopping the lies. It was about keeping control of my life, my home, and my safety. I couldn't let fear take over. I had to keep standing, keep documenting, and keep using the tools that could protect me. Even though I was scared, I felt something else too. Strength. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not powerless. I had saved evidence. I had witnesses. I had someone whose whole job was to protect people from harassment. And I had myself. That gave me a small kind of courage that I hadn't felt before. From that night on, I became more careful. I made sure the doors were locked and the cameras were on. I saved every message, every note, every post. I felt more aware of every step I took and every person I trusted. Isolde's actions could scare me, but they couldn't stop me from protecting myself. I realized that some people, even family, might try to control you or make trouble for you. And sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who test your patience and your courage the most. But I also learned that help exists even when it feels impossible. There are people like officers, lawyers, and neighbors who notice and care. And there are ways to protect yourself if you take the right steps. That was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Even when the quiet felt heavy, even when the papers appeared in the mailbox, I learned I could stand my ground. I could protect my home, my job, and myself. And maybe one day I would find a way to have peace in my house again, not because nothing bad could happen, but because I knew how to face it if it did. My hands shook when I turned on the television for some background noise and looked at the camera I had put near the back door. I had set it up months ago just in case something strange happened, but I never really thought I would need it. The video showed Isolde coming in with a key she wasn't supposed to have anymore. My stomach dropped. She walked through the room slowly, barely touching anything, and then left a note on the table like she had left a signature. It wasn't a friendly note, not a hello, not an apology. It was her way of saying, I can still come in whenever I want. She wasn't there to talk or argue. She was there to show that she could cross my space even when she wasn't allowed. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were still shaking. I couldn't believe it. I saved the video in many places before I even thought about what to do next. I saved it on my computer on a USB drive and even emailed it to myself. I wanted to make sure that no matter what, I had proof of what happened. Then I sent a short email to Rain with the video attached. Rain was my lawyer and she helped me know what to do in situations like this. After sending the email, I called the police on the non-emergency line to report that someone had entered my house without permission. Saying it out loud felt strange and unreal, but it was the truth. This was no longer just about being upset or gossiping. This was about my safety and it was about the law. By the time I hung up, I realized that hoping Isolde would just stop coming over wasn't a plan. If anything was going to change, it would have to come from a judge. The idea of getting a restraining order no longer sounded extreme or scary. It sounded like the bare minimum I could do to protect myself. Seeing Isolde walk through my kitchen on that video snapped everything into focus. Before that, I could pretend that this was just ugly family tension that might blow over. But now it was real. When the police officer came to my house and left with my statement about the break-in, I understood something important. Hoping Isolde would respect my boundaries on her own was not enough. If I wanted to feel safe again, I needed help from the law. Rain added the police report and screenshots of the video to the file she was building. Then she explained the next step. We would ask the court for a temporary order to make Isolde stay away from me and my home until a full hearing could take place. Filling out the forms for the temporary order made me stop hiding behind soft words. The questions were blunt and direct. Did someone make false reports to authorities? Did someone interfere with your work? Did someone come into your home without permission? Did you feel unsafe in your own house? A year ago, every answer would have been no. But now I had to answer yes to all of them. I could no longer pretend this was just an exhausting family drama. This was something serious. The temporary order was approved in just a few days. A judge I would never meet read my file and decided that there was enough proof to keep Isolde away from my home for now. One scanned signature didn't make me feel brave, but it changed the way I moved through my home. Locking the doors at night no longer felt like wishful thinking. For the first time since this all began, there was something official protecting me that did not depend on my parents taking my side or Isolde suddenly deciding to behave. The full court hearing happened on a gray morning in a worn courthouse downtown. I sat beside Rain on a hard bench, feeling nervous. I watched Isolde arrive, and she looked annoyed rather than scared, like going to court was an inconvenience I had created. Inside the courtroom, the judge asked for facts, not stories from the past. Rain laid out the events clearly like points on a line. She explained the police report that came after the false story I had been told, the post online that twisted the truth, the anonymous complaint that risked my job, the note in my mailbox, and the video of Isolde walking through my kitchen with a key she should not have had. When you looked at it all together, it didn't look like mistakes. It looked intentional. When Isolde spoke, she leaned on familiar stories. She said she was a single mother who had been pushed too far, that she was scared for her children, and that I had turned cold after she had helped me for years. She left out the parts where she had put my job at risk or stepped into my home when I wasn't there. In her version, the real problem was that I had finally said no. From my chair, I could hear how carefully she skipped the important parts. The judge, however, did not repeat her story. In a steady voice, he said her behavior was unacceptable, noted that it was likely to continue, and granted me a 1-year order. No contact, no visits, no more dragging my employer into our fight. My parents waited outside the courtroom. They didn't ask if I felt relieved or safe. They asked why I had let it go this far, why I couldn't keep it private, and how holidays would work with court papers in the way. Their reaction made something very clear. They cared more about appearances and the perfect family than about what had actually happened behind closed doors. Meanwhile, my job moved on a separate track. Human Resources finished reviewing the complaint and emailed me to say there were no problems. My manager told me that the company still saw me as dependable. On paper, the damage had been contained. Off paper, I understood how easily it could have gone the other way. After the hearing, Rain raised another option. I could file a civil claim to ask for money to cover what I had already lost and what I was paying now to protect myself. Thinking about suing my own sister made my stomach feel sick. Every message I had grown up with said, "Don't take family to court." Then I remembered the note Isolde had left on my table, which used that belief as a threat. Signing the first set of papers didn't feel like an attack. It felt like refusing to keep paying for her choices with my future. And for once, that felt like the most reasonable choice in the room. Weeks passed after the claim was filed, and the chaos around it slowly turned into a routine I could live inside. I went to work, came back to my half of the duplex, cooked simple dinners, folded laundry, and answered emails from Rain. The fight with my sister was no longer happening in my driveway or living room. It had turned into dates on a calendar and documents in a folder. That quiet shift made it easier to keep moving. The judgment arrived in the middle of an ordinary day. During lunch, I opened an email from Rain and saw a few lines that changed everything. The court had closed the case. Isolde never filed a proper answer and never put up a defense in writing. A judge reviewed the file on their screen and entered a default decision in my favor. On record, she now owed me $9,600. There was no dramatic scene, no sudden feeling of triumph, just a clear confirmation that what I went through was serious enough for a stranger to recognize in black and white. That money did not undo the night a police officer stood on my porch or the meeting where Human Resources questioned my job. It did not fix the months I spent worrying that my future might collapse because someone I loved decided to misuse my reliability. What it did do was separate the truth from the version my family kept telling themselves. This was not about me being too sensitive or her being stressed. The court had looked at the same behavior I had tried to excuse and called it harmful with a cost. The judgment also meant consequences were finally pointed in the right direction. It would stay on Isolde's record when she tried to rent an apartment or borrow money. It would appear quietly whenever someone ran a check and saw her name attached to an unpaid debt from a lawsuit. I did not feel joy about that, but I also did not feel any duty to protect her from it. For years she had treated my time, reputation, and sense of safety like they were hers to spend. Now the debt had a line of its own that did not begin or end with me. Inside the family, the distance became solid. Invitations to Sunday dinners stopped, and group messages went on without me. My parents sent occasional texts about missing how close we all used to be, carefully skipping over the reports and orders they had seen unfold. I answered only when I felt strong enough, with short, neutral sentences. I stopped typing out long explanations that no one was really asking for. I allowed myself to accept that caring about them did not mean standing in front of every fire started by their favorite child. My duplex slowly shifted from a place I defended into a place I lived in again. The new locks and cameras stayed not because I expected another stunt, but because they reminded me that my safety was allowed to be a priority. I cleared out spare blankets and toys that were always waiting for last-minute drop-offs and replaced them with things that belonged only to me. A thicker blanket on the couch, a plant that somehow survived on the windowsill, a lamp that made the living room feel warmer. None of it erased what had happened, but each small choice said the same thing. This home is mine. One afternoon, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a short note from Eloane. She wrote that she missed watching movies on my couch and seeing the stray cat on my steps. She wished things were not so strange now. There were little hearts drawn at the bottom and a shaky version of her name. There was no mention of lawyers, accusations, or money. Just a child trying to understand why something that had felt safe had been taken away. I sat at the kitchen table and let the ache do what it needed to do. Then I folded the letter and slid it into the same folder as the court papers. Together they told the full story, not just what had been done to me but who else had been pulled into the blast radius. I wanted more than anything to write back to Eloane and tell her that none of this was her fault, that I still loved her. But any letter I sent would travel through the same person who had already proven she would twist my reality to suit her own. The only way to protect Eloane was to hold my boundaries long enough so that when she was old enough to look for answers herself, she would find an aunt who was still standing. As more weeks went by, everyday life slowly stretched around the damage instead of collapsing under it. A knock at the door still made my body tense for a second, but the feeling eased when I remembered the locks I chose and the order that had my name on it. Work returned to being just work, not a place where I braced for another anonymous complaint. I began to think about my own future in terms of what I wanted, not what I could sacrifice for someone else's crisis. In the end, the real turning point was not the judgment, the restraining order, or any specific piece of paper. It was the moment I stopped treating my own boundaries as optional whenever someone used the word family like a weapon. I had spent years believing that being the responsible one meant saying yes until it broke me. All that did was teach the people around me that my time, peace, and safety had no price. If there is one thing I hope someone listening to this hears, it is this: you are allowed to leave a story that is destroying you. Even if the people writing it share your last name, you can care deeply about children without letting their parents burn your life down. You can love your family and still say no when they turn that love into leverage. Walking away from my sister did not fix the past. It left empty chairs and questions I may never answer. But it gave me something I am not willing to lose again. A life that finally belongs to me. A life guarded by boundaries I will not apologize for no matter who comes knocking.